Hello and welcome to Africa Today. I am Esther Mokwariola. These are interesting times across Africa, where the pendulum of political discourse continues to swing from tweets to streets as young people demand credible leadership alternatives to untangle the existing power dynamics on the continent. In Uganda, the story is no different, validating the narrative that politics isn't for the faint-hearted and being in opposition rarely the best option. And so we ask, what are your thoughts on political developments in Uganda following the recent arrest of a popular government critic amidst protests in the country? You can join the conversation and share your thoughts with us on Twitter at TVC News NG. And Africa Today will be right back. Welcome on board.
Court Jones adjourned after next week.
An opposition Ugandan lawmaker was charged with treason on Thursday, August 23rd, over his alleged role in the stoning of President Yoweri Museveni's convoy this month. A civilian magistrate ordered Robert Kyagulanyi, who is also known as Bobby Wine, remanded in custody until August 30 and granted him access to private doctors, citing the health of the accused. Kyagulanyi, who only entered parliament last year, has been left unable to stand after allegedly being beaten while in detention.
It is the considered opinion of this court that the accused person, particularly A33 and others in similar condition, are allowed to access their private doctors at any time, as and when. And those who cannot afford the private doctors are hereby direct the prison's authorities to take them to the necessary facilities to ensure that their health is guaranteed. I so order.
The Ugandan government says the assault accusation is rubbish. Kyagulanyi was walking with one crutch and the assistance of prison wardens when entering the courtroom. Earlier on Thursday, a separate military court dropped charges of unlawful weapons possession against Kyagulanyi, a popular musician whose songs biting criticism of Museveni's government has won him a large youth following. His detention, along with 4 other politicians critical of Museveni, sparked 2 days of anti-government demonstrations in the capital Kampala and other parts of the country this week. 3 other lawmakers and dozens of other people have also been charged with treason over their alleged role in the convoy stoning. Protesters and opposition supporters accuse Museveni, in power since 1986, of cracking down on dissent through intimidation, beatings and detentions, charges which his government denies.
Welcome back. Well, before we get into the discussion of the day, let's update you on some of the top news stories around Africa. Zimbabwe's top court has dismissed an opposition bid to have presidential election results annulled over alleged rigging in favor of President Mnangagwa. The main opposition candidate in Mali's contested election says he categorically rejects the results of the presidential runoff that handed a second term to Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta. Ghana's former president John Mahama has announced his bid to seek the nomination of the main opposition party and contest the 2020 election. Now joining me to look at political developments in Uganda, I have on Skype Dr. John Mbako, researcher and lecturer at Weber State University, United States. I also have Abayomi Azikiwe, editor, Pan-African Wires, Detroit, United States, and Chukwuemeka Eze, African Affairs analyst, joining me from Abuja, Nigeria's capital. Good to have you all, gentlemen, on the program.
Thank you.
Now, let me start with you now, Chukwuemeka Eze. Looking at what happened in Uganda, many would have thought it came as a surprise and shock because we saw the dissent arrested and, of course, protests, some people gagged for protests. What were your thoughts? What are your thoughts on the initial arrangement and what happened in Uganda?
I'm not surprised by what has happened in Uganda.
Really?
Uganda from independence, there is nobody that has ruled Uganda that tolerated opposition. You recall that this was guerrilla master. I mean, Yoweri Museveni, from 1986, for about 10 years before he contested election. So he doesn't have, if not for the Western pressure to adopt democracy, he does not have democratic credentials. And recall that all his opponents, since he has been contesting election, had always been accused of treason. He accused Kizza Besigye of treason. He accused Mbambazi of treason. So I'm not surprised that he has accused Bobby Wine of treason. So I'm not surprised at all by what Museveni is doing in Uganda.
But John Mbaku, looking at how things played out in Uganda, one would have thought that in a democratic setting, there is every chance for the opposition to raise his or her voice. You don't need to be held down. But what are your thoughts on how the opposition is being gagged down in Uganda?
Well, I think that it's not really appropriate to look at Uganda and consider Uganda as a full-fledged democracy, primarily because if Uganda is a democracy in the sense of what we really understand as democracy, it's virtually impossible for one individual to be in government for this long. Because if you are having, if the country is having free, credible, and fair elections, the president should have been booted out of power by now. So I think that what is happening in Uganda is what is happening in some other countries, like Cameroon, for example, where the country holds elections every so often, and the incumbent continues to win the elections, and the government then uses the elections to tell the international community that we are a democracy, when in reality they are not a democracy, because whenever an election comes up, the incumbent government makes it impossible for the opposition to mount a credible campaign. And I think this is what is going on in Uganda, in that the government is really afraid that the opposition might make inroads, and so it's using the process to basically destroy any person in the opposition. I think this is what is going on in the country.
And so, Rabayami, does it mean that the people in Uganda are left with little or no choice in terms of who guides them, who speaks for them? Do you think they have no choice in this matter here?
What has happened, particularly over the last few years, is that any formidable opposition party or figure have been targeted by the Ugandan government. In addition to Bobby Wine, there are others who have been arrested. One of the longtime opposition figures, Kizza Besigye, was also arrested as well when he was attempting to leave his home on yesterday. Apparently, the Museveni government feels threatened by Bobby Wine, who has a lot of popularity, particularly among youth, due to his background as a pop star. At the same time, they fear that he may attempt to contest the upcoming national elections, which are taking place in 2021. And Mr. Museveni, it appears, is going to attempt to contest these elections again, even though, he's in his mid-70s. So this is a pattern that we've seen in Uganda over the last few years. And it was mentioned before that Museveni has been in power since 1986. He came to power through a guerrilla movement, the National Resistance Movement and Army.
So he
has been elected.
Yeah,
yes.
I get you. But are you trying to say now the people have no choice in who governs them in terms of, because Museveni has been there since the 80s now, and from what you're trying to say, it's like he's here to stay.
Yes, the political party that's in power dominates the electoral apparatus. And they feel very strongly that Bobby Wine and others may pose a threat. They've already won several local governmental elections, and they're claiming that he was involved in the stoning of Museveni's convoy in Arua, which is in the northern part of the country. He was detained by the military and then turned over to a civilian court where he's been charged with treason. So apparently, the government is quite worried about this new phenomenal political movement that's coming up in Uganda. And as it is now, people who oppose Museveni have very little recourse in regard to making a major impact on Ugandan politics.
And do you think the government will be able to control the people from the opposition's power, Abayomi?
Well, it depends on the balance of forces in the country. Museveni has strong support within the military. He does have a political base as well. I mean, there are people in Uganda still who view him as a stabilizing force. That there was a lot of chaos in Uganda going back to the early 1970s, successive governments through the late 1970s, early 1980s. Nonetheless, there is a groundswell that wants change in the country as well. So it depends on the balance of forces between those who do want change and particularly the security forces, the military. The military did say that they didn't support how the protesters were handled over the last few days. People have been beaten and detained unjustly. This is what they're saying because there's been a lot of outcry about this, even on an international level.
Right. All right, let's quickly go on a quick break now. You're watching Africa Today, and we've been looking at political developments in Uganda following the recent arrest of a government critic amidst protests in the country. The Ugandan government filed a treason charge on Thursday against a pop star turned lawmaker who is a major critic of the country's long-time president. Kyagulanyi Ssentamu, popularly known as Bobby Wine, appeared weak and struggled to walk into court, with his lawyer alleging he was severely beaten in custody. Now, Chukwuemeka Eze, when the report came that he was assaulted, for opposing the government or criticizing the government, many came out to protest. There were a lot of cries on social media and all of that because it's something undemocratic. But from your point of view, you said it's nothing new. I mean, seeing the way things have turned out in Uganda, what are the likely repercussions going forward? Do you see any more protests like this? What are your expectations generally?
My expectation is that the opposition will be having a very hard time in Uganda. If you go back to the background, the profile of Kizza Besigye, that's Forum for Democratic Forces. That's the main opposition leader in Uganda. There is no treatment that he had not been subjected to, notwithstanding that he was a former personal physician to Museveni. Even while walking on the street, he was arrested, he was charged, he was beaten, he was charged for treason, and that one hung on his head, on his neck for about 5 years, trying to defend himself for that allegation. So basically, what Bobby Wine is going through is the experience of Kizza Besigye. And if you look at the history of Uganda, there is no leader in Uganda that has been removed through a democratic process. This young man
He came out to protest. There were a lot of cries on social media and all of that because it's something undemocratic. But from your point of view, you said it's nothing new. I mean, seeing the way things have turned out in Uganda, what are the likely repercussions going forward? Do you see any more protests like this? What are your expectations generally?
My expectation is that the opposition will be having a very hard time in Uganda. If you go back to the background, the profile of Kizza Besigye, that's Forum for Democratic Forces. That's the main opposition leader in Uganda. There is no treatment that he had not been subjected to, notwithstanding that he was a former personal physician to Museveni. Even while walking on the street, he was arrested, he was charged, he was beaten, he was charged for treason, and that one hung on his head, on his neck for about 5 years, trying to defend himself for that allegation. So basically, what Bobby Wine is going through is the experience of Kizza Besigye. And if you look at the history of Uganda, there is no leader in Uganda that has been removed through a democratic process. This young man came into parliament last year, and the ruling party has lost 4 elections. 4. And the president campaigned in these 4 elections, and he lost, even the last one. While Bobby Wine was in prison, he was under arrest, the candidate he supported still won, an independent. That's to tell you that Museveni is quite afraid, and the opposition, I don't see Museveni giving them opportunity to win any election, democracy or not democracy. There is a trend in Eastern Africa now. If you look at Zimbabwe, you look at Zambia, you look at Uganda, you will see they have integrated their army into their political cause. So almost every action the leader takes, he involves the army. The last time there was argument over passing of the constitutional amendment to remove the presidential term limit. The opposition was against it. There was demonstration. Museveni involved the army. If you look at the election in Zimbabwe, the ruling party involved the army. So basically, this is not democracy. I don't expect Bobby Wine to be successful at the end of the day. Museveni would not like to be disgraced out of office. He's ready to do anything to ensure that he retains power.
Right now,
and I don't see internal forces succeeding.
John Mbaku, from what Chukwemeka is positing here, it's more like Museveni would have his reigns in power even in 2021. But what do you think could be the possible way out of the situation in Uganda where the people can finally choose who leads them and they wouldn't be afraid of who is in power come what may?
The effective way for Uganda to move forward is for grassroots efforts to get Museveni out of power. Perhaps the international community can do something, but in the end, it would be the people of Uganda who will rise up, like the people in Burkina Faso did some time ago, and basically tell the government that they no longer support the government and try to get Museveni out, even though the army is behind Museveni. I think that if the people of Uganda, especially if you have grassroots efforts, if they rise up and try to get him out of power, they will eventually succeed. The only problem you have in Uganda is that many people are so dependent on the government for economic sustenance that is going to be very difficult to bring people together and get them to try to get Museveni out. But I think that the reason Museveni is so afraid of Bobby Wine is because Bobby Wine has been able to tap into that constituency, young people who are willing to do what it takes to get a new set of leaders into government. I think that is the key for young people to basically tell the government that we no longer want the old order. We want new people who can come up with new ideas on how to move Uganda forward. I think that young people hold the key. And if young people continue to protest, I think that eventually the army will be able to see the futility of continuing to have this kind of government that does not allow individuals to speak, does not allow people to provide ideas on how the government, how the country should be governed. I think the young people hold the key to the future of Uganda.
Right. Now, Abayemi Azikiwe, what's your take on what can be done to ensure that the country gets a viable opposition and, of course, keep the military out of the streets?
It will depend on how much support the opposition can garner. It will also be a determining factor if there are elements within the ruling National Resistance Movement Party or those within the military, if they have a change of heart, if they turn against Museveni, then it could be very critical. However, the state apparatus in Uganda is very dominant, and the military has been quite formidable. If you look at how they dealt with the insurgency surrounding the Lord's Resistance Army, which was eliminated, the Allied Democratic Forces, which now claims to be an Islamist rebel movement, has been curtailed as well. And there has been investment from the international community into the Ugandan economy, military assistance, particularly from the United States, into Uganda as well. So these are variables that we have to look at and assess in an attempt to try to determine what the viability of the opposition really is. It depends if they can crush the demonstrations that are going on right now against this crackdown, then Museveni can run again and possibly win power again. However, if the critical sectors of the population turn against him, then it's going to really be a crisis in Uganda.
Chukwemeka, if we're to bring this home now, who would you say will stand a greater chance against Museveni in 2021?
If he stops persecuting Bobby Wine will be a veritable force in 2021. Because the youths that are supporting him never knew of the exploits of Yoweri Museveni. Museveni belongs to the last generation. Look at what has happened in Austria. The youths are rising in many parts of the world and they want to take their destiny in their hands. They are fed up with gerontocratic arrangements in many countries. But African leaders are operating on the basis of letters Samoa of Louis XIV of many centuries ago. That is, I am the state. They still hold this notion that without them, the country cannot survive. So that's the problem, and the youth are challenging them. Luckily for Ugandans, somebody like Bobby Wine, the ghetto president, is ready to lead it and suffer the consequences. But I see Museveni not allowing him because history supports my position that these democratic movements in Uganda will be crushed by Museveni. It was done by Milton Obote during his time, which made Yoweri Museveni to leave for Kenya and subsequently lead a guerrilla army to oust Milton Obote in 1986. So basically, it's quite difficult to use democracy to remove a rule line in East Africa.
So what would be your best proposition?
Only the Western countries can help. if there will be sanctions on Museveni and all those around him, tighten the news around him, then we may have what happened in Democratic Republic of Congo. You can see that Kabila played all his games. He played his last joker, and at the end of the day, he was pressured to step down. Only that, but for internal forces to remove Museveni through the ballot, I very much doubt it.
Well, let's leave it at that and see how things unfold in Uganda. Let me thank my trio guests, Abayomi Azikiwe, Chukwuemeka Eze, and Dr. John Mbaku. We appreciate your insight so far on the program.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
With parts of Africa yet to unbundle the relics of iron fist, sit-tight leadership, Uganda puts the continent on the spotlight, featuring Yoweri Museveni, who has been the president of the East African nation in the last 32 years. Beyond a strong man in power, sustainable development largely depends on purpose-driven, forward-thinking leadership, where democratic governance is successive and not repressive, or else the next revolution may not be too far away. And that is our package for tonight. But don't forget to join the conversation as usual on Twitter at TVC News NG, and follow me for updates around Africa at Esther TVC News. Until the next one again, I am Esther Omopariola, and always remember, Africa can only get better.